The blade catches sunlight as it falls. Limestone chips scatter across the temple floor, each strike of the chisel deliberate, methodical, final. A master craftsman works in silence, sweat dripping from his brow in the Egyptian heat, erasing a face that once commanded empires. He carves away her eyes, her lips, the graceful curve of her neck. With every blow, a queen disappears, not into death, into something far worse, into forgetting. But here is what the men with hammers did not understand. You cannot destroy what refuses to die. Her name was Nefertiti, and 33 centuries after powerful men tried to erase her from existence, she stares back at us from museums with a gaze so penetrating, so alive, that millions travel across continents just to stand before her, to feel seen by a woman who saw everything, who knew everything, who wielded power so absolute that the only response was to pretend she had never existed at all. This is not a story about a beautiful queen. Beauty is the least interesting thing about Nefertiti. This is a story about a woman who stood at the center of the most radical religious revolution in human history. A woman who may have commanded armies that stretched from the cataracts of Nubia to the cedar forests of Lebanon. A woman who possibly ruled the wealthiest empire on earth as pharaoh in her own right, not as regent, not as placeholder, but as sovereign. And then she vanished. No tomb, no mummy, no explanation. Just silence where there should be monuments, just empty cartouches where her name should blaze eternal. Just questions that have haunted archaeologists for more than a century. Who was Nefertiti? How did a woman in the ancient world rise to such staggering heights? What did she believe? What did she want? And why were the guardians of tradition so terrified of her legacy that they spent decades systematically destroying every trace of her reign? The answers lie buried in desert sand and hidden in hieroglyphs that scholars are still learning to read. They emerge from tombs cut into cliffsides and from artifacts scattered across museums worldwide. They whisper from the ruins of a city built in religious fervor and abandoned in fear. Every word you are about to hear is rooted in archaeological evidence, in the painstaking work of Egyptologists who have devoted their lives to recovering what was lost. This is not mythology. This is not romance. This is history, strange, unsettling, magnificent history. This is the story of the woman they tried to erase. To understand the revolution, you must first understand what was being overthrown. 18 dynasties of pharaohs had risen and fallen by the time Nefertiti drew her first breath. The Great Pyramids at Giza were already ancient monuments built by kings whose names echoed like distant thunder through Egyptian memory. Khufu, Khafre, Menkaure. 1,000 years separated Nefertiti from those pyramid builders. 1,000 years of conquest and consolidation, of expanding borders and accumulating wealth, of priests growing powerful and traditions calcifying into unbreakable law. The Egypt of Nefertiti's youth was not a kingdom, it was the colossus that bestride the ancient world. From the fourth cataract of the Nile in Nubia to the Euphrates River in Syria, Egyptian power reached like the fingers of a god. Tribute flowed into Thebes and Memphis from dozens of vassal states, gold from Nubian mines in quantities that beggar imagination, cedar from Lebanon, copper from Cyprus, lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, ivory from the heart of Africa. The empire's wealth was so staggering that foreign kings wrote letters begging for Egyptian gold, calling it more plentiful than dust in the streets. This was the 18th dynasty at its zenith. Egypt's armies were the finest fighting force in the known world, equipped with composite bows that could pierce armor at 200 paces, with chariots that moved like thunder across the battlefield, with bronze weapons forged in workshops that employed thousands. Egyptian generals campaigned in lands their grandfathers had never seen. Egyptian scribes recorded tribute from peoples whose names their ancestors had never heard. And above it all, the pharaoh Amenhotep III presided like the sun itself. His reign lasted 38 years of almost uninterrupted prosperity. He built the largest temple complex Egypt had ever seen at Karnak, adding courts and pylons and forests of columns to honor Amun-Ra, king of gods. He commissioned colossal statues of himself. The famous Colossi of Memnon still stand today, each one weighing 700 tons, carved from single blocks of quartzite and transported hundreds of miles from distant quarries. He married a woman named Tiye, who became his great royal wife, and together they presided over an empire that seemed destined to last forever. But beneath the golden surface, tensions simmered. The priesthood of Amun had grown into an empire within the empire. They controlled more land than some foreign kingdoms. They employed tens of thousands of workers in their estates. They received a portion of every tribute payment, every tax collection, every military conquest. The high priest of Amun wielded influence that rivaled the pharaoh himself, not through military force, but through something far more insidious, through the monopoly on divine access. Egyptian religion was not a matter of personal faith. It was the mechanism that kept the universe functioning. The gods were real, present, demanding. They required daily rituals, precise offerings, complex ceremonies performed with exact precision. Miss a ritual, and the Nile might not flood. Anger the gods, and chaos would swallow creation itself. The concept was called Ma'at, cosmic order, balance, truth, justice, all bound together in a single principle that governed everything from the movement of stars to the behavior of peasants. And the priests controlled Ma'at. They alone could enter the inner sanctums where the god statues resided in perpetual darkness. They alone knew the sacred formulae, the ritual gestures, the prayers that maintained cosmic harmony. They alone could declare whether a pharaoh was fulfilling his divine mandate or risking catastrophe. This gave them power that no army could challenge, the power to legitimize or delegitimize the throne itself. The pharaohs understood this. They donated lavishly to the temples, built monuments to the gods, participated in endless rituals to demonstrate their piety, but they also resented it. What good was absolute power on earth if you remained dependent on a priesthood that could threaten cosmic consequences for political decisions? Into this world of glittering wealth and simmering tension, a girl was born. We do not know the exact year. We do not know the city with certainty. We do not even know her parents, though scholars have theories. Perhaps she was the daughter of Ai, a powerful courtier who would later become Pharaoh himself. Perhaps she came from Akhmim in Upper Egypt, a city known for producing educated elites who served in the royal administration. What we know is her name, Nefertiti. In the ancient Egyptian tongue, it means, "the beautiful one has come." The name tells us something. It suggests she was noticed, remarked upon, considered extraordinary from youth. In Egyptian culture, names carried weight and meaning. They were not arbitrary labels, but declarations of identity and destiny. To name a daughter, "the beautiful one has come," implied expectation, anticipation, perhaps even prophecy. She was educated, this much is certain. Elite Egyptian women were not secluded or silenced. They could read and write, own property, conduct business, divorce husbands, inherit wealth. The Egyptian language had no word for obey in marriage contracts. Women were considered legal persons with rights and responsibilities. Queens had wielded significant religious authority for centuries, serving as priestesses of Hathor, participating in crucial state rituals, occasionally acting as regents for young sons. But what Nefertiti would become went far beyond anything that had come before. Somewhere in her youth she encountered a prince, the second son of Amenhotep III and Queen Tiye, not the heir apparent but a boy who would become heir through tragedy when his older brother Thutmose died young. The prince's birth name was Amenhotep. Amun is satisfied, and by all accounts he was unusual. Ancient depictions show him with an elongated skull, a long neck, wide hips, a prominent belly. Modern scholars have speculated endlessly about possible medical conditions: Marfan syndrome, Froelich syndrome, various hormonal disorders. Others argue that the distinctive artistic style developed during his reign deliberately exaggerated his features to emphasize his divine peculiarity, to show that he was touched by the gods in ways ordinary mortals were not. What matters is that he was a revolutionary thinker in a civilization that valued tradition above all else. Something in his upbringing, perhaps the influence of his mother Tia, who was herself a formidable political figure, perhaps exposure to foreign ideas through diplomatic contacts, perhaps genuine religious experience we cannot access across the millennia, led him to question the foundations upon which Egyptian civilization rested. And when he met Nefertiti, everything changed. We cannot know the details of their first meeting. We cannot say whether it was arranged marriage or genuine attraction, political calculation or passionate love. The evidence does not survive. But what we can see clearly in the archaeological record is that their partnership became one of the most consequential in ancient history. They married before he ascended the throne, possibly while he was still crown prince. She would have been in her early teens, which was typical for royal marriages in that era. And when the old pharaoh Amenhotep III died around 1353 before the Common Era, the prince became Amenhotep IV. Beside him stood Nefertiti, perhaps 15 years old, now great royal wife of Egypt. The kingdom she inherited was vast, wealthy, powerful, and completely unprepared for what was about to happen. The first few years of the new reign seemed conventional enough. The young pharaoh performed the expected rituals, made the appropriate offerings, built monuments in the traditional style. But those who looked carefully could see something shifting. The king was spending increasing amounts of time in religious contemplation. He was asking questions that pharaohs were not supposed to ask. He was looking at the sun, that life-giving disk that rose each morning and crossed the sky in blazing glory, and seeing something that disturbed the foundations of everything Egypt believed. In the 5th year of his reign, Amenhotep IV made a proclamation that would shatter 3,000 years of tradition. There was, he declared, only one God worthy of supreme worship, not Amun-Ra with his temple empire and grasping priesthood, not Osiris, Lord of the dead. Not Isis, not Horus, not Hathor, not Thoth, not any of the countless deities that Egyptians had venerated since time immemorial. Only the Aten, the sun disk itself, the physical manifestation of light and life. This was not reform. This was heresy of a magnitude that takes the breath away, even across 33 centuries. Egyptian religion was polytheistic to its core. The gods were everywhere, in every aspect of life, governing everything from the flooding of the Nile to the birth of children to the weighing of hearts in the afterlife. They were not abstractions, but living presences with temples and priests and festivals and sacred animals. To declare that only one God mattered, that the others were insignificant or even non-existent, was to tear out the heart of Egyptian civilization and replace it with something utterly alien. And standing beside the pharaoh, championing this vision with equal fervor and authority, was Nefertiti. In the 6th year of his reign, the king went further. He changed his name, an act of staggering significance, because a pharaoh's name was not merely a label, but a statement of cosmic alignment, a declaration of which divine forces empowered the throne. No longer would he be Amenhotep. Amun is satisfied. From this moment forward, he would be Akhenaten, effective for the Aten, or spirit of the Aten. It was complete repudiation. A pharaoh's name invoked the gods who blessed his rule, who gave him legitimacy, who connected him to the divine order. By changing his name, Akhenaten was severing Egypt's connection to Amun and all the traditional gods. He was declaring them powerless, irrelevant, perhaps even false. The priesthood of Amun must have reeled in shock and fury. For centuries, they had been the gatekeepers of the divine, the interpreters of sacred will, the indispensable intermediaries between heaven and earth. And now, a pharaoh was telling them they were unnecessary, that their god was nothing, that their power was an illusion. But Akhenaten was not finished. A name change was dramatic, but ultimately symbolic. He needed something more concrete, more permanent, more complete. He needed to physically separate himself and his revolution from the old order. So he did something almost unprecedented in Egyptian history. He abandoned Thebes, the ancient capital where pharaohs had ruled for centuries. He abandoned Memphis with its pyramids and monuments. He abandoned every city associated with the traditional priesthood and their now rejected gods. And in the desert, on virgin land, midway between Upper and Lower Egypt, on the east bank of the Nile where cliffs formed a natural amphitheater, he founded a new city, a city that had never been dedicated to Amun or Osiris or any of the old gods, a city that would be devoted entirely to the Aten. He called it Akhetaten, horizon of the Aten. Today, we know it as Amarna. And in this new city built from religious fervor and revolutionary zeal, Nefertiti would rise to heights of power that no Egyptian queen had ever reached. The construction of Akhetaten happened with breathtaking speed. Akhenaten could not afford to wait generations for his sacred city to rise gradually from the desert. He needed his capital now, immediately, before the old priesthood could organize resistance, before foreign enemies could exploit the chaos of transition, before his own court could fracture under the weight of such radical change. Thousands of workers were conscripted from across Egypt. Stone was quarried from the surrounding cliffs. Mud bricks were molded in quantities that stagger the imagination. Archaeologists estimate millions upon millions of bricks were produced in just a few years. Entire workshops were established to produce the building materials needed for a complete city. And within perhaps 5 years, a metropolis emerged from nothing. The city stretched for miles along the eastern bank of the Nile, protected by cliffs that rose like natural fortress walls behind it. At its heart stood the great temple of the Aten, but it looked like nothing Egypt had ever seen. Traditional Egyptian temples were places of mystery and shadow. You entered through massive pylons, decorated with images of the pharaoh smiting enemies, then passed through progressively smaller and darker chambers until you reached the innermost sanctuary, where the god's statue resided in near total darkness. Only the highest priests could enter these holy of holies. The great temple of the Aten shattered every convention. It was open to the sky, completely, deliberately, radically open. There were no dark chambers where priests could accumulate secret knowledge and claim exclusive access to the divine. The temple consisted of a long series of courtyards filled with hundreds of offering tables, all exposed to sunlight. This was intentional. The Aten was the sun itself, the physical disk that gave light and life to all creation. It could not be hidden in darkness. Its rays fell equally on everyone. The theological implications were revolutionary. By designing a temple with no inner sanctum, no hidden spaces, no priestly monopoly on sacred knowledge, Akhenaten was declaring that the old system of religious mediation was obsolete. You did not need priests to intercede with the Aten. You did not need secret rituals or mysterious formulae. You needed only to stand beneath the sun and receive its life-giving rays. But there was a catch, a brilliant, politically shrewd modification to this seemingly egalitarian theology. The Aten did not bestow its blessings on everyone equally. In the artistic representations that covered every wall in Akhetaten, the sun disk is shown with rays extending downward, each ray ending in a small hand. And those hands touch only 2 people, Akhenaten and Nefertiti. The divine life force flows from the Aten to the royal couple and from them to the rest of Egypt. This was theological genius. Akhenaten had eliminated the priesthood's monopoly on divine access, but he had replaced it with an even more exclusive arrangement. Now only the royal couple could commune with God. Only they received the Aten's blessing directly. Everyone else, nobles, officials, soldiers, craftsmen, peasants, accessed the divine only through the intermediation of Akhenaten and Nefertiti. The political implications were staggering. Without the royal couple, Egypt had no connection to the divine. Without them, cosmic order would collapse. They had made themselves absolutely indispensable in a way no pharaoh had ever been before. And always, in every representation, Nefertiti stood equal to her husband. This is where the story becomes truly extraordinary, where we move from religious revolution into something even more radical. Because Nefertiti was not depicted as a typical Egyptian queen, standing demurely behind her husband, smaller in scale, secondary in importance. She stood at the same height as Akhenaten. In Egyptian artistic convention, size indicated status and power. Pharaohs were always shown larger than their subordinates. Queens were traditionally depicted smaller than their husbands, a visual representation of hierarchy and proper order. But in Amarna, Nefertiti appears at equal size to Akhenaten, sometimes even slightly larger in certain compositions. She performs rituals that had been reserved exclusively for pharaohs. On temple walls throughout Akhenaten, she raises her arms in the traditional posture of offering to the Aten, making the gestures that maintain Ma'at and ensure cosmic harmony. Previous queens had performed religious functions, certainly, but always in supporting roles, always as priestesses serving alongside the pharaoh, never as equals in the central act of cosmic maintenance. Nefertiti does more than support. She acts independently. There are scenes showing her alone, without Akhenaten present, receiving the Aten's blessing directly. The sun disk's rays reach down to touch her upraised hands, bestowing the Ankh symbol of life upon her. If she could receive divine power without her husband present, then she possessed independent religious authority. She was not merely the pharaoh's consort channeling power through him. She was herself a direct conduit to the divine. And then there are the images that truly defy belief. In several reliefs discovered in the ruins of Amarna, Nefertiti appears driving a chariot, not riding as a passenger driving, holding the reins, controlling the horses. In ancient Egypt, the chariot was the ultimate symbol of military might and royal power. Pharaohs were depicted in chariots hunting dangerous game, charging into battle, trampling enemies beneath their wheels. The chariot represented speed, strength, dominance, masculine martial prowess. Queens did not drive chariots. It was not done. It violated every expectation of proper feminine behavior. But there is Nefertiti, reins in hand, looking every bit the warrior. And most stunning of all, most impossible to reconcile with traditional Egyptian gender norms, there are reliefs showing Nefertiti in the classic pose of the pharaoh smiting enemies. Her arm is raised high, gripping a mace. Beneath her feet lie bound captives, their faces turned away in submission and terror. Her expression is one of divine fury, the righteous anger of a sovereign defending Ma'at against the forces of chaos. This image requires us to stop and truly comprehend its significance. The scene of the pharaoh smiting enemies is one of the most iconic and sacred representations in all of Egyptian art. It appears on temple pylons, on ceremonial mace heads, on the walls of tombs and palaces. It symbolizes the king's role as defender of cosmic order, as the living embodiment of Horus, who defeats the enemies of Egypt and maintains the boundaries between civilization and chaos. This image had been used for thousands of years, and it had always, without exception, been reserved for pharaohs. Not even Hatshepsut, who actually ruled as pharaoh in the 18th dynasty, who took masculine titles and wore the false beard of kingship, appears in this exact pose as frequently or prominently as Nefertiti does. Hatshepsut often presented herself as male in official art to fit the expectations of pharaonic imagery. But Nefertiti is shown as unmistakably female, wearing the elegant gowns and distinctive crown of a queen, yet performing the masculine royal function of smiting enemies without disguising her gender. She is a woman wielding pharaonic power openly, without apology, without needing to pretend to be male. This is revolutionary in a way that is difficult to overstate. Egyptian civilization had rigid ideas about gender roles, about masculine and feminine principles, about the cosmic balance between opposing forces. The pharaoh was male because he represented the active, penetrating, creative force that impregnated the land and caused it to flourish. Queens were female because they represented the receptive, nurturing, supportive principle that received the king's power and helped channel it for the benefit of Egypt. For a woman to take the masculine role while remaining visibly, proudly female was to scramble these cosmic categories in ways that must have been deeply unsettling to traditional Egyptians. But the revolution went even further. The entire artistic style of the Amarna period broke with centuries of Egyptian convention in ways that still startle modern viewers. Traditional Egyptian art was formal, idealized, eternal. Pharaohs were shown as eternally youthful, physically perfect, standing or sitting in rigid frontal poses with calm, impassive expressions. Bodies followed strict mathematical proportions. Every gesture was standardized. The goal was not realism, but timeless perfection, to show the pharaoh not as he appeared in any single moment, but as he existed in eternity. Amarna art shattered these conventions with almost shocking intimacy. Suddenly, we see informality, emotion, tenderness. Akhenaten and Nefertiti are shown kissing their daughters, their lips actually touching in a display of affection that would have been unthinkable in earlier Egyptian art. The royal family relaxes beneath the rays of the Aten in casual domestic scenes. Akhenaten sits with a daughter on his lap while conducting state business. Nefertiti nurses an infant while foreign dignitaries stand before her awaiting audience. These scenes are revolutionary because they humanize the royal family while simultaneously elevating them to divine status. The message is subtle but powerful. Akhenaten and Nefertiti are not distant, unapproachable gods like Amun or Osiris. They are a loving family blessed by the Aten, and that blessing is expressed through tenderness and intimacy. They are accessible, relatable, human. But they are also the only humans who matter in the cosmic scheme. The Aten's rays touch only them. They alone channel divine power to the rest of Egypt. Without them, the connection is severed. Without them, Ma'at cannot be maintained. This makes them more essential than any pharaoh had ever been, not distant and godlike, but intimately, personally, indispensably necessary. And in all these intimate family scenes, Nefertiti is present, not in the background, not as decoration, but as an equal participant in the divine family drama that unfolds beneath the Aten's blessing. In the 12th year of Akhenaten's reign, something significant occurred. There was a great durbar, a royal reception, where foreign dignitaries from across the ancient Near East came to Akhenaten to pay tribute to Egypt and honor the Aten. The event was commemorated in the tombs of several high officials, giving us detailed descriptions of what transpired. Envoys came from Nubia, from Syria, from the Aegean Islands, from distant lands whose names appear in hieroglyphic inscriptions, but whose exact locations scholars still debate. They brought gifts of staggering value: gold and silver, precious stones, exotic animals including leopards and monkeys, fine textiles dyed in expensive purples, rare woods, incense, and perfumes. They prostrated themselves before the Egyptian throne in the traditional gesture of submission. And in the inscriptions and reliefs that record this event, Nefertiti appears prominently, not merely present as an ornamental consort, but actively receiving tribute, participating in diplomatic ceremonies, sitting on a throne that mirrors her husband's in size and grandeur. This is crucial evidence. Foreign kings did not bring tribute to queens. They brought tribute to rulers, to sovereigns who held the power to grant or withhold favor, to make war or peace, to elevate vassal kings or destroy them. The fact that these envoys acknowledged Nefertiti alongside Akhenaten suggests that by the 12th year of the reign, she was recognized internationally as a co-ruler of Egypt. But shortly after this moment of triumph, something changes in the historical record, and this change has fueled passionate scholarly debate for more than a century. Nefertiti's name begins to appear differently in inscriptions. She adopts an additional name, Nefertiti. This is more than an honorific or epithet. The name Nefertiti incorporates elements of her husband's throne name and the name of the Aten itself. It is a throne name, the kind of name pharaohs adopted upon ascending to sole rule. And then, in some inscriptions, she appears alone, not as queen consort accompanying her husband, but as a figure of independent authority. There is a cartouche, the oval frame reserved exclusively for pharaohs, that denoted royal status and divine kingship, and inside that cartouche is her name, Nefertiti. In the Egyptian system, only pharaohs had their names enclosed in cartouches. This was not decorative flourish. This was a formal declaration of royal status, a claim to sovereignty. Some Egyptologists argue this means Nefertiti was elevated to co-regent, ruling alongside Akhenaten as an equal pharaoh, not his queen, but his partner on the throne. Two pharaohs reigning simultaneously, both crowned, both wielding sovereign authority. This would be unprecedented. Egypt had known female pharaohs before Sobekneferu had ruled at the end of the 12th dynasty. Hatshepsut had ruled in the 18th dynasty. But Sobekneferu's reign was brief and left little mark. Hatshepsut had presented herself as male in many official depictions, taking masculine titles and wearing masculine regalia to fit the expectations of kingship. But Nefertiti, ruling alongside her husband as full co-pharaoh, both of them crowned and empowered simultaneously, with her maintaining her feminine identity while wielding masculine royal authority, this was something entirely new. The evidence is fragmentary, as so much from this period is. The systematic destruction of Amarna after Akhenaten's death means we are working with incomplete information, with pieces of a vast puzzle scattered across museums and archaeological sites worldwide. But piece by piece, the picture emerges. In the tomb of Meria, a high official who served as high priest of the Aten, there is a scene showing a royal audience. Two thrones appear side by side beneath the rays of the Aten. Both thrones are occupied by crowned figures of equal size, wearing full royal regalia. Some scholars believe both figures are Akhenaten and Nefertiti, reigning together as co-pharaohs. In the tombs of other nobles at Amarna, prayers are addressed not just to Akhenaten, but to both the king and Nefertiti, asking for their favor and blessings. The language used is not the language appropriate for a subordinate queen. It is the language reserved for sovereign rulers, for those who hold the power of life and death, who can grant estates and titles, who can elevate courtiers to positions of influence or destroy them with a word. What was Akhenaten thinking? Why would a pharaoh share power in a way that violated every tradition of Egyptian kingship? Perhaps he had no choice. Perhaps Nefertiti's political acumen, her religious authority, her sheer force of personality had become so essential to governing Egypt and maintaining the Aten revolution that she could not be contained by the traditional role of queen. Or perhaps, and this is where the story becomes even more intriguing, Akhenaten's health was failing and Nefertiti was preparing to rule alone. Let us step back from titles and inscriptions and consider what Nefertiti's power meant in practical terms. Ancient Egypt was not a ceremonial monarchy where the pharaoh merely performed rituals while administrators quietly ran the government. The pharaoh was an active, hands-on ruler who made military decisions, approved massive building projects, negotiated directly with foreign kings, presided over legal disputes, managed the economy, and performed daily religious rituals essential to maintaining cosmic order. If Nefertiti was co-regent, she was doing all of this. We have evidence of her involvement in diplomatic affairs. The Amarna letters, a cache of clay tablets containing diplomatic correspondence between Egypt and foreign powers, include letters that reference Egyptian royal women wielding significant influence in international relations. While Nefertiti is not explicitly named in every case, the timing and context of certain letters suggest she was directly involved in diplomatic decision-making. In one letter, a foreign king writes requesting an Egyptian princess to marry his son, noting that Egyptian royal women sometimes marry foreign royalty. This was actually quite rare. Egypt typically received foreign princesses, but almost never sent its own princesses abroad, as Egyptian royal blood was considered too sacred to be diluted in foreign courts. The fact that this king thought it worth asking suggests he believed the Egyptian court might be more flexible under Akhenaten and Nefertiti's rule. In another letter, a vassal king in Canaan writes complaining about Egyptian policy and explicitly mentions the authority of the Great Queen in his appeal. In the conventions of ancient Near Eastern diplomacy, you did not waste precious words on ceremonial figures. Clay tablets were expensive to produce and difficult to transport. Every line served a purpose. If a vassal king thought mentioning the queen might influence Egyptian policy, it was because she held real decision-making power. There is also evidence suggesting Nefertiti participated in military matters, or at least in the ceremonies and symbolism surrounding military authority. We have already discussed the images of her smiting enemies, but there are also inscriptions that give her military titles. She is called Lady of the Two Lands, a title that invokes sovereignty over all Egypt, both Upper and Lower Egypt united under single rule. She is called Mistress of Upper and Lower Egypt, which is explicitly pharaonic language. She is given the epithet Great of Praise, which typically referred to military victory and the acclamation that followed successful campaigns. Now, this does not necessarily mean Nefertiti personally led troops into battle, though even that is not completely impossible. Royal women in various ancient civilizations occasionally accompanied military campaigns, and there are hints in the archaeological record that some Egyptian queens may have done so as well. What it certainly means is that she held command authority. She had the power to order military action. Generals reported to her. Military decisions required her approval. Consider what this means. Ancient Egypt maintained one of the most powerful military forces in the world. Professional soldiers, chariot corps, archers, infantry, garrison troops stationed in forts throughout Nubia and the Levant. If Nefertiti held military authority, she commanded this vast force. She made decisions about where troops would be deployed, how to respond to foreign threats, which vassal kings would be supported, and which would be punished for disloyalty. This is power of the most concrete and terrifying kind. This is not symbolic authority or religious prestige. This is the ability to mobilize violence on a massive scale, to destroy cities and depose kings, to execute rebels and reward loyalty with grants of conquered land. But perhaps Nefertiti's greatest authority lay in the religious sphere. In the Aten cult, she played an absolutely essential role. She was not merely a priestess performing rituals. She was the female principle of divine order itself, the receptive and nurturing aspect that balanced the masculine solar power of the Aten. In some inscriptions, she is described as the one who pacifies the Aten with her beautiful voice. She performed rituals that maintained cosmic harmony. Without her, the balance would be broken. Without her, Ma'at itself would fail. This is a profound theological statement. It means that Akhenaten, for all his radical authority as the prophet of the Aten, could not maintain Ma'at without his queen. She was not auxiliary or optional. She was essential to the functioning of the cosmos itself. And if she was essential to cosmic order, then she was absolutely indispensable to political order. No one could challenge her authority without threatening the universe itself. We have reached the heart of the mystery, a moment where Nefertiti stands at the absolute pinnacle of power, equal to a pharaoh, essential to the state, commanding armies and negotiating with foreign kings. receiving divine blessing directly from the Aten. And then, suddenly, inexplicably, she disappears from the historical record. After the 12th year of Akhenaten's reign, after the Great Durbar, where she appeared at the absolute height of her power, Nefertiti's presence in the official record begins to fade. Not gradually. Not with the slow decline of old age or the graceful retirement of someone voluntarily withdrawing from public life. She simply stops appearing. Her name vanishes from inscriptions dated to the later years of Akhenaten's reign. Her image disappears from temple walls being constructed in those final years. The woman who had been everywhere, whose face and titles had dominated the visual vocabulary of Amarna, is suddenly, inexplicably absent. What could cause such a sudden erasure? The traditional explanation, the one you will find in older textbooks and popular documentaries, is that Nefertiti fell from favor. Perhaps she displeased her husband. Perhaps she opposed some aspect of the religious revolution. Perhaps she was caught in a palace power struggle and lost. Royal courts throughout history have been dangerous places where favor can be withdrawn in an instant, where yesterday's confidant becomes today's exile. But this explanation crumbles when we examine the evidence carefully. If Nefertiti had simply been disgraced and removed from power, we would expect to see certain telltale signs. Her monuments would be systematically defaced. Her names would be chiseled out of inscriptions, leaving obvious scars on the stone. Her images would be destroyed or recarved to show someone else. The Egyptians were not subtle about damnatio memoriae, the official erasure of someone from history. When they wanted to obliterate someone's memory, they did so thoroughly, methodically, unmistakably. We can see this with Hatshepsut, whose monuments were defaced decades after her death by Thutmose III or his successors. We can see it with Akhenaten himself, whose names and images were systematically destroyed after the Amarna period ended, his cartouches hammered into oblivion, his face chiseled away until only empty stone remained. But that is not what we find with Nefertiti during Akhenaten's lifetime. In Amarna itself, in the buildings constructed during the early and middle years of the reign, Nefertiti's images remain intact. Her cartouches are complete. Her face stares out from temple walls with that same serene confidence. There is no systematic campaign to erase her during Akhenaten's lifetime, no evidence of organized destruction, no signs of the violent obliteration that would accompany official disgrace. So if she did not fall from grace, what happened? Theory 1. Nefertiti died suddenly, perhaps around year 12 or 13 of Akhenaten's reign. Death was omnipresent in the ancient world. Even royalty with access to the best food, the finest medical care, the most comfortable living conditions could not escape disease, infection, complications from childbirth, a sudden illness that modern medicine would treat easily, but ancient physicians could only watch helplessly as it progressed. If Nefertiti died around year 12 or 13, it would explain her sudden absence from later inscriptions. The dead do not appear in contemporary records documenting ongoing events. They are commemorated, mourned, honored in funerary inscriptions and tomb paintings, but they do not continue to appear in active political scenes, in depictions of rituals being performed, in records of tribute being received. But here is the devastating problem with the death theory. We have never found her tomb. We have never identified her mummy. Every other member of the royal family from this period, even minor princes and princesses, can be accounted for in the archaeological record. Their tombs have been found, even if robbed in antiquity. Their mummies have been identified through careful analysis of archaeological context, through inscriptions, through DNA testing that links them to other known royal burials. But not Nefertiti. There is no tomb at Amarna labeled as hers. There is no mummy that Egyptologists can confidently identify as belonging to the most powerful queen in Egyptian history. There are candidates, mysterious, unidentified female mummies found in various royal caches, but none that can be definitively proven to be Nefertiti. It is as if she simply vanished without leaving physical remains. This is extraordinarily unusual. The Egyptians took death and burial with ultimate seriousness. A proper burial was not merely tradition or custom, it was essential for survival in the afterlife. The elaborate mummification process, the tomb construction, the grave goods, the funerary texts inscribed on coffins and tomb walls, all of this was necessary to ensure that the deceased could navigate the dangerous journey through the underworld and achieve eternal life. No one, especially not a queen who wielded such enormous power, who was essential to maintaining Ma'at itself, would have been carelessly disposed of or denied proper burial rites. So where is she? Theory 2. Nefertiti was exiled or politically sidelined. Perhaps there was a power struggle at court that does not appear in the official record because the victor controlled what was recorded. Perhaps she opposed Akhenaten's increasingly radical policies as the revolution showed signs of strain. Perhaps she argued for reconciliation with the traditional priesthood, for a tactical retreat from the most extreme positions, for pragmatic compromise to preserve the dynasty. Some Egyptologists point to evidence that Nefertiti may have moved to the North Palace in Amarna, a separate royal residence away from the main palace complex. Archaeological excavations at the North Palace have revealed it was occupied by a high-status woman. The artifacts recovered suggest feminine presence, and the architecture indicates someone of royal or near-royal status. If she had withdrawn from active political life, either by choice or under pressure, this would explain why she stops appearing in official inscriptions while not being actively persecuted. She would be alive but retired, no longer participating in state rituals, no longer receiving foreign dignitaries, no longer wielding the power that had made her indispensable. But this theory also has significant problems. Why would the most powerful woman in Egypt, a woman who had ruled as co-regent, who commanded armies and negotiated with foreign kings, suddenly retreat to a secondary palace? What force could compel someone of her authority into retirement? And if she was sidelined against her will, why is there no hint of conflict in the surviving records, no suggestion of conspiracy or palace coup? Which brings us to Theory 3, the most intriguing, the most controversial, and increasingly the most accepted among serious Egyptologists. Nefertiti did not disappear, she simply changed her name. Around year 13 or 14 of Akhenaten's reign, precisely when Nefertiti stops appearing under her familiar name, a new figure emerges in the historical record. A co-regent, someone who rules alongside Akhenaten in the final years of his life. The name given in inscriptions is Ankh-Keperur Smenkhkare. For decades, Egyptologists assumed this was a male figure, perhaps a younger brother of Akhenaten, perhaps a son from a minor wife, perhaps even a male favorite, given the intimate imagery sometimes associated with this mysterious figure. The assumption of masculinity seemed safe because pharaohs were male, co-regents were male, and the entire institution of kingship was coded as fundamentally masculine. But the evidence for Smenkkare's gender is remarkably thin. There are no clear, definitive images showing this person's physical form. There are cartouches with the name. There are fragmentary relief carvings, but nothing that unambiguously depicts biological sex. And here is where it becomes fascinating. Some of the inscriptions associated with Smenkhkare use feminine grammatical forms. In ancient Egyptian, grammar was gendered. Adjectives and verb forms changed depending on whether they referred to male or female subjects. This was not optional or stylistic, it was fundamental to how the language worked. And in some texts referring to Smenkhkare, the grammar slips into feminine forms. These could be scribal errors. Ancient scribes were human and made mistakes, especially when dealing with unprecedented situations that the language was not designed to handle. But they could also be clues, breadcrumbs left by scribes who knew the truth but were constrained by official protocol. If scribes occasionally used feminine forms when writing about Smenkhkare, perhaps it was because Smenkhkare was female. Then there are the titles. Some inscriptions give Smenkhkare the epithet beloved of Akhenaten. This sounds romantic, and many scholars have interpreted it as evidence of a homosexual relationship between Akhenaten and a male co-regent. But beloved of was standard language for royal spouses in ancient Egypt. Queens were routinely described as beloved of the pharaoh. This phrasing, rather than indicating a male lover, might indicate a female spouse. And then there is the most compelling piece of evidence. The name Neferuaten appears in connection with Smenkhare in several inscriptions. Sometimes the two names appear together, as if they refer to the same person who held both names simultaneously. Sometimes Neferuaten appears alone in contexts where we would expect to find Smenkhare. Now remember, Nefertiti had earlier in the reign taken the name Neferuaten as an additional throne name, incorporating elements of Akhenaten's name and the Aten itself into her own identity. If Neferuaten and Smenkhare are the same person, and if Nefertiti had previously used the name Neferuaten, then the logical conclusion is startling. Nefertiti, Neferuaten, and Smenkhare might all be the same person. A queen who became co-regent, who took multiple throne names as pharaohs traditionally did, who ruled Egypt with full royal authority. The case becomes even stronger when we consider what happened after Akhenaten's death. Akhenaten died around 1336 or 1335 before the Common Era, after ruling for approximately 17 years. His health had likely been deteriorating for some time. The physical peculiarities visible in his artistic representations may have been symptoms of actual medical conditions that shortened his life. And after his death, before the boy Tutankhamun ascended the throne, someone ruled Egypt briefly as sole pharaoh. That someone was Neferuaten. We know this from inscriptions that date to the period immediately following Akhenaten's death. We know this from objects bearing the name Neferuaten, with full pharaonic titles and regalia, the crook and flail, the double crown, the cartouches that proclaimed royal status. We know this from the sequence of rulers preserved in later king lists, even though those lists tried desperately to obscure the Amarna period and pretend it never happened. Neferuaten ruled as pharaoh. That much is now widely accepted by scholars. The debate is about who Neferuaten was. Some believe it was Meritaten, the eldest daughter of Nefertiti and Akhenaten. She was a royal princess. She married and survived into the post-Akhenaten period, and she could theoretically have claimed the throne. But the inscriptions referring to Neferuaten as beneficial for her husband or beloved of her husband make little sense if applied to Meritaten. Her husband, Smenkhare, if that was indeed a separate person, had no independent claim to rule. He was not pharaoh before her. The language suggests Neferuaten was honoring a deceased pharaoh husband, which fits Nefertiti honoring Akhenaten, but does not fit Meritaten's situation. Others believe Neferuaten was Ankhesenamun, another daughter who later married Tutankhamun. But the timing does not work well, and there is no clear evidence linking her to the name Neferuaten. The simplest explanation, the one that requires the fewest assumptions and best fits all the available evidence, is that Neferuaten was Nefertiti herself. That she ruled first as co-regent with Akhenaten under the names Neferuaten and possibly Smenkhare, and then briefly as sole pharaoh after Akhenaten's death. If this is true, and an increasing number of Egyptologists believe it is, then Nefertiti achieved something extraordinary. She ruled as pharaoh. She held absolute power over the most powerful empire on earth. She commanded armies, negotiated with foreign kings, performed the sacred rituals, wielded the crook and flail, wore the double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt. She became what no queen before her had fully become, a female pharaoh ruling in her own right while maintaining her feminine identity. Let us examine the evidence even more carefully, because this is not idle speculation or wishful thinking. This is rigorous historical detective work based on archaeology, linguistics, and painstaking analysis of fragmentary records. In 2012, a German-Egyptian archaeological team made a significant discovery in a limestone quarry near Amarna. They found an inscription dated to year 16 of Akhenaten's reign, one of the later years of his rule, that mentions Nefertiti and provides details about building projects and quarry work. The inscription shows that Nefertiti was actively governing at this time. This was not merely a ceremonial figure or a figurehead. This was someone ordering construction projects, managing resources, exercising executive authority over major state initiatives. And the grammatical forms in the inscription are feminine. The pharaoh Nefertiti is referred to with feminine adjectives and verb forms. This is crucial evidence. It confirms that Nefertiti was female and was exercising pharaonic authority in the later years of Akhenaten's reign. Then there is the evidence from burial goods and funerary equipment. Several objects have been found bearing the name Nefertiti with full pharaonic titles. Canopic jars vessels used to hold the internal organs of the deceased during mummification bear the name Nefertiti with cartouches and royal epithets. These are not objects made for a queen consort. These are objects made for a reigning pharaoh, someone who expected to be buried with full royal honors, someone whose funerary equipment proclaimed sovereign status. And fascinatingly, some of these objects were originally made for Akhenaten but were modified, with Nefertiti's names added or substituted. This suggests a very close relationship, a relationship where one ruler inherited or appropriated the burial equipment of another. This pattern fits a spouse inheriting from a deceased partner far better than it fits any other scenario. It suggests that when Akhenaten died, Nefertiti, whether that was Nefertiti under a throne name or someone else, took possession of royal funerary goods that had been prepared for him, adapting them for her own eventual burial. There is also the matter of succession and political stability. After Akhenaten died, Egypt needed a ruler immediately. The ancient world did not tolerate power vacuums. Foreign enemies would exploit any weakness. Vassal states would test whether they could break free. The bureaucracy required direction. Religious rituals had to be performed daily to maintain cosmic order. Missing even a single day's offerings to the Aten would risk catastrophe. Who could step into that role? A child could not rule effectively. Tutankhamun was perhaps 8 or 9 years old when he eventually became pharaoh. He would have needed a regent, someone to rule in his name until he came of age, someone to make the actual decisions while he learned statecraft. But there was a gap between Akhenaten's death and Tutankhamun's accession, and in that gap, someone ruled as pharaoh with full authority, not as regent for a child king, but as pharaoh in their own right. The most logical candidate is someone who had experience ruling, who commanded respect from the military and bureaucracy, who had legitimate royal blood, and who had already exercised pharaonic authority for years. Someone like Nefertiti. If she had been co-regent with Akhenaten for the final years of his reign, she would be the natural choice to assume full power after his death. She knew how to govern. Generals and administrators had been taking orders from her for years. She had divine legitimacy through her essential role in the Aten cult. She could provide stability during a dangerous transition period. But being a female pharaoh presented challenges that could not be ignored. The institution of kingship in Egypt was fundamentally coded as masculine. The pharaoh was the incarnation of Horus, the falcon god of kingship. The pharaoh was the son who avenges his father Osiris and restores order to the world. The pharaoh impregnated the land with his divine power, causing the Nile to flood and crops to grow. These were masculine roles, rooted in masculine divine mythology. How could a woman fulfill these functions? Hatshepsut had faced this exact problem 2 centuries earlier. Her solution was to present herself as male in most official contexts. In statuary and reliefs, she wore the false beard of kingship. She wore masculine regalia. Inscriptions often used masculine grammatical forms to refer to her. She essentially became a male pharaoh in the official record, even though everyone knew she was biologically female. Did Nefertiti make the same choice? Did she present herself as male when ruling as pharaoh? Some of the evidence suggests yes. The name Smenkhare is grammatically masculine. If Nefertiti used this name, she was adopting masculine identity, at least in some contexts, at least for some purposes. But other evidence suggests she maintained feminine identity. The name Nefertiti appears with feminine grammatical forms in multiple inscriptions. Some of the royal epithets associated with this pharaoh use feminine language. The funerary equipment bears feminine forms. It is possible, even likely, that Nefertiti navigated a middle path, a sophisticated political strategy that allowed her to claim authority while not completely disrupting the theological framework she and Akhenaten had constructed. Perhaps she used masculine names and forms in military and diplomatic contexts where masculine authority was expected and necessary. Perhaps she maintained feminine identity in religious contexts, where her role as the female principal, balancing the Aten's masculine power, remained theologically essential. This would be brilliant political theatre, claiming full pharaonic authority while preserving the cosmic balance that Egyptian ideology demanded. But Nefertiti's reign as sole pharaoh, if indeed she ruled alone, was brief. Within perhaps 2 or 3 years of Akhenaten's death, the throne passed to Tutankhamun, the boy king who would become the most famous pharaoh in modern popular culture because his tomb, almost uniquely among royal burials, survived relatively intact until its discovery in 1922. But when Tutankhamun ascended the throne around 1332, before the Common Era, he was a child, perhaps 8 years old, perhaps 9, too young to rule effectively, too young to make the complex decisions required to govern an empire. He was married to Ankhesenamun, the third daughter of Akhenaten, and Nefertiti, his own half-sister, which was common practice in Egyptian royal families to preserve bloodline purity. And crucially, he was controlled by powerful advisors who had waited through the entire Amarna period for the opportunity to restore the old order. Chief among these advisors were 2 men, I and Horemheb. I was possibly Nefertiti's father, though this remains debated among scholars. He had served as a high official under Akhenaten, holding titles like Master of Horses and God's Father. He was elderly, experienced, politically shrewd, a survivor who had managed to maintain his position through the radical upheavals of the Aten Revolution. After Tutankhamun's death, I would briefly become pharaoh himself, ruling for perhaps 4 years. Horemheb was a military commander. He had risen through the ranks during Akhenaten's reign, but he had never truly embraced the Aten Revolution. He represented the military establishment, which had watched with growing alarm as Akhenaten focused obsessively on religious reform, while Egypt's empire frayed at the edges, while vassal states grew restless, while foreign powers tested Egyptian resolve. After A's death, Horemheb would seize the throne and rule for nearly 3 decades, presiding over the complete restoration of the old order and the systematic erasure of the Amarna period from official history. These men had no love for the Amarna experiment. They had witnessed tradition upended, the old priesthood humiliated and stripped of power, the theological foundations of Egyptian civilization attacked and replaced with something alien and unstable. And now, with a child on the throne, they had the opportunity to undo everything. Within a few years of Tutankhamun's accession, the court abandoned Amarna. The sacred city built with such hope and fervor was left to the desert. The capital returned to Memphis and Thebes, to the traditional centers of power, where the old gods still whispered in the stones. The temples of Amun were reopened and restored. The priesthood regained their land, their wealth, their monopoly on divine access. The old rituals were reinstituted, the festivals resumed. The gods returned from exile. Even the boy king's name was changed. No longer Tutankhaten, living image of the Aten. Now he was Tutankhamun, living image of Amun. His very identity was rewritten to serve the restoration, to proclaim that the old order had triumphed, that the brief madness was over. A stela was erected, proclaiming the restoration. It described Egypt during Akhenaten's reign as a time of chaos and divine abandonment. It claimed the temples had been neglected, the rituals ignored, the gods angry and vengeful. It announced that the young pharaoh Tutankhamun was restoring Ma'at, returning Egypt to proper tradition, healing the wounds inflicted by his heretic father. This was propaganda, carefully crafted to justify the counter-revolution and delegitimize everything Akhenaten and Nefertiti had built. But the destruction went far beyond simply changing religious policy. After Tutankhamun's death at approximately age 18, likely from complications of injuries sustained in a chariot accident, combined with chronic health problems visible in his mummy, briefly took the throne. His reign lasted only 4 years, and after died, Horemheb became pharaoh. Horemheb was a military man with no patience for religious experimentation or radical queens, and under his rule, the systematic physical destruction of Amarna began. The destruction was methodical. The city of Akhenaten was not simply abandoned to slowly crumble under wind and sun. It was actively dismantled, piece by piece, stone by stone, as if the very ground on which it stood was cursed. Temples were torn down, palaces were demolished. The great temple of the Aten, that revolutionary open-air sanctuary where sunlight had poured down on offering tables and the divine rays had touched the royal couple, was reduced to rubble. The stones were carried away to be reused in building projects elsewhere, recycled into monuments that would honor the traditional gods Akhenaten had tried to replace. This was standard practice in ancient Egypt. Stone was valuable, quarrying was labor-intensive, and recycling building materials from abandoned sites made economic sense. But the destruction went far beyond practical resource management. Inscriptions bearing Akhenaten's name were deliberately defaced. His cartouches were chiseled out with precision, leaving scars on the stone that proclaimed his damnation. Images of him were destroyed, faces hammered away, figures hacked from walls, reliefs depicting the royal family worshipping the Aten systematically obliterated. This was damnatio memoriae in its most complete and vengeful form. Not just abandonment, not just neglect, active erasure. A campaign to remove Akhenaten and his revolution from memory entirely, to pretend that 17 years of Egyptian history had never occurred. And Nefertiti was erased most thoroughly of all. Her monuments at Amarna were defaced with particular violence. Her cartouches were removed. Her face was chiseled away from temple walls. Any record suggesting she had ruled as pharaoh was suppressed, destroyed, obliterated so completely that for thousands of years, historians would barely know she had existed beyond being Akhenaten's beautiful wife. The official king lists compiled by later scribes simply omitted the entire Amarna period. They jumped directly from Amenhotep III to Horemheb, as if Akhenaten, Nefertiti, Smenkhare, Tutankhamun and had never existed. 17 years of history erased with bureaucratic efficiency. Later, pharaohs referred to Akhenaten not by name but as the criminal or the rebel or that enemy from Akhenaten. He became unmentionable. His very name was pollution that could not be spoken without contaminating the speaker. And Nefertiti, who had wielded such extraordinary power, who may have ruled as pharaoh in her own right, who had been essential to maintaining cosmic order itself, she was erased so completely that her tomb has never been found, her mummy has never been identified, her reign as pharaoh was nearly forgotten entirely. If not for the survival of Amarna's ruins buried under desert sand, if not for that incredible painted bust found in Thutmose's workshop, we might barely know she existed. Why did the Egyptian establishment work so desperately hard to erase Nefertiti? Why was it not enough to simply reverse Akhenaten's religious policies and move on? because Nefertiti represented something the guardians of tradition could not tolerate. She was a woman who had wielded absolute power. She had ruled as a man ruled, commanding armies, governing an empire, performing the rituals that maintained Ma'at. She had claimed authority that Egyptian ideology insisted was inherently masculine, that flowed from the pharaoh's role as the incarnation of Horus, the divine son and king. A female pharaoh was more than a political problem. It was a theological crisis. It violated Ma'at itself. The cosmic order depended on proper roles being maintained. The king was masculine, active, creative, penetrating, the force that impregnated the land and caused it to flourish. Queens were feminine, receptive, nurturing, supportive, the vessel that received the king's power and helped channel it for Egypt's benefit. When a woman claimed the masculine role of pharaoh, she disrupted this cosmic balance. She scrambled the categories upon which the entire universe depended. She proved that the rigid hierarchies were not natural law, but human construction. And if such a disruption was recorded and remembered, it might inspire other women to claim similar authority. It might call into question the entire ideological structure that justified male monopoly on power. So Nefertiti had to be forgotten. Her reign had to be erased. The very possibility that a woman could rule successfully had to be removed from the historical record. This pattern of erasure recurs throughout history. Powerful women have their accomplishments attributed to men or dismissed as the work of male advisors. Their names are omitted from chronicles and official records. Their monuments are destroyed, or their authorship reassigned to male predecessors or successors. They are written out of the story, relegated to footnotes, remembered only as wives and mothers of powerful men, rather than as powerful figures in their own right. The men who erased Nefertiti believed they were protecting tradition and maintaining cosmic order. They believed they were restoring Ma'at after years of chaos. They believed they were saving Egypt from the consequences of theological innovation and gender transgression. But what they were really doing was revealing their own fear. They feared that if people remembered a woman had ruled successfully, the entire patriarchal structure which claimed that only men could rule, only men could command, only men could exercise ultimate authority, would be exposed as constructed rather than natural, as political choice rather than cosmic inevitability. So they tried to make Nefertiti disappear from history entirely. But the erasure failed. On December 6, 1912, a German archaeological team led by Ludwig Borchardt was excavating the ruins of Amarna. They were working in the remains of what had once been the workshop of Thutmose, the master sculptor who had created artistic masterpieces for the royal family during the height of the Amarna period. The workshop had been abandoned suddenly when Akhenaten was deserted after Akhenaten's death, and in that abandonment, objects were left behind: tools, unfinished sculptures, pieces awaiting completion. And in a back room, carefully wrapped and stored as if waiting for a moment that never came, something extraordinary. A painted limestone bust of a woman. Her face was perfectly symmetrical, hauntingly beautiful. She wore a tall blue crown, flat-topped and elegant, unlike any other crown in Egyptian iconography. Her neck was elongated and graceful, emphasized by the sculptor to create an impression of regal bearing. She gazed forward with serene confidence, her lips curved in the slightest hint of a smile. One eye was fully intact, inlaid with rock crystal and black paint, gazing out with startling realism that made her seem alive, despite 33 centuries of burial. The other eye socket was empty, whether by design or because the inlay was lost, scholars still debate. Borchardt wrote in his excavation diary, "Suddenly we had in our hands the most alive Egyptian artwork. You cannot describe it with words, you must see it." It was Nefertiti, the queen herself, or at least Thutmose's vision of her, preserved in limestone and paint for over 3,000 years. The bust had been buried beneath sand and rubble since the abandonment of Amarna around 1332 before the Common Era. But when it emerged into the light of the 20th century, it was as if she had never left. The paint was still vibrant, the blue of her crown, the gold of her collar, the realistic skin tones. The craftsmanship was exquisite, the presence was overwhelming. Burckhardt knew immediately that this was one of the most important archaeological discoveries in history. He also knew that if Egyptian authorities realized its full significance, they would never allow it to leave the country. So he engaged in what can only be called archaeological deception. When he showed the bust to Egyptian antiquities inspectors during the formal division of finds, a process where excavated objects were split between Egypt and the excavating nation, he presented it poorly lit, covered in dust, made to look less impressive than it truly was. The inspectors, seeing what appeared to be just another piece among thousands, allocated it to Germany. The bust left Egypt, and it has never returned despite decades of Egyptian requests and formal demands for its repatriation. It resides today in Berlin's Neues Museum, where it is one of the most visited and photographed works of art in existence. Millions of people have stood before it. Nefertiti's face has become perhaps the most recognizable image from ancient Egypt. More people can identify her than can identify any pharaoh except perhaps Tutankhamun. Her image appears everywhere: museum posters, fashion magazines, cosmetics advertisements, academic textbooks, album covers, jewelry designs. She has become a global icon of beauty, power, and ancient mystery. But what is remarkable is this: the bust's power does not come merely from its aesthetic perfection, though it is undeniably beautiful. It comes from what it represents. When you stand before that bust in Berlin, when you look into that single intact eye, you are not looking at an abstract ideal of beauty. You are looking at a specific person who lived 33 centuries ago. A woman who made decisions that altered the course of history. A woman who stood beside a pharaoh as his equal and perhaps ruled as pharaoh herself. A woman whose power was so threatening that men spent decades trying to erase her from existence. The ancient Egyptians believed that an image could preserve a person's essence, their ka, for eternity. They believed that as long as someone's name was spoken and their image survived, they would continue to exist in some form, sustained by memory and recognition. In this sense, Nefertiti achieved the immortality every Egyptian craved. Her name is spoken millions of times each year. Her image is reproduced endlessly. She lives in human memory and consciousness in a way few ancient people do. But there is profound tragedy in her survival too, because we remember her face but have lost her voice. We know what she looked like but not what she thought. We can see her power recorded in stone, but can only guess at her personality, her motivations, her fears, her private self. History has preserved Nefertiti as an icon, but icons are not people. They are symbols, stripped of complexity and nuance. And symbols can be projected upon, reinterpreted, reshaped to fit whatever narrative the present moment requires. Nefertiti has been claimed by many causes. Feminists see her as a symbol of female empowerment, a woman who broke barriers and wielded power in a world structured to exclude women from authority. Beauty industries appropriate her as the eternal ideal of feminine perfection, using her image to sell cosmetics and fashion while ignoring the political power she actually held. Afrocentrist scholars debate her ethnicity and claim her as African heritage, while some claim her as evidence of ancient connections between Egypt and other civilizations. She has been romanticized, mythologized, commodified, politicized. But perhaps beneath all that projection, there was simply a human being, a woman who lived in a specific time and place, who navigated the constraints and opportunities available to her, who formed genuine partnership with a radical religious reformer, who seized power when it became available and wielded it effectively, who wanted what most rulers want: to be effective, to be remembered, to matter, to leave the world different than she found it. And in that most fundamental goal, she succeeded beyond measure. But Nefertiti's triumph was incomplete, because within a generation of her death, everything she and Akhenaten built was systematically destroyed. The Aten cult was abandoned, the revolution was reversed. The city they built was left to the desert. Yet they could not destroy what mattered most. Today, archaeologists continue to search for Nefertiti's tomb. Some believe it may be hidden in the Valley of the Kings, perhaps behind a sealed doorway in Tutankhamun's famous tomb. In 2015, British Egyptologist Nicholas Reeves proposed that Tutankhamun's tomb contains hidden chambers that might hold Nefertiti's burial. Ground-penetrating radar surveys have yielded tantalizing but inconclusive results. The Egyptian government has authorized further investigation, though as of now, no hidden chambers have been definitively confirmed or opened. Others think Nefertiti's tomb remains undiscovered in Amarna itself, buried beneath sand and rubble in the desert cliffs where royal tombs were being prepared during her lifetime. The royal tomb at Amarna, intended for Akhenaten and possibly for his family, was never completed and was vandalized in antiquity. Whether Nefertiti was ever buried there or whether she was moved elsewhere remains unknown. If we ever find her tomb, if we ever uncover her mummy and can study her remains with modern scientific techniques, it will be one of the greatest archaeological discoveries in history. We will finally be able to analyze her DNA, understand her health, reconstruct details about her life that no amount of textual analysis can provide. We might be able to confirm her relationship to other royal family members. We might finally solve the mystery of what happened to her. But in a profound way, we have already found what matters most. We have found her legacy. We have recovered her story from the erasure that tried to consume it. We have pieced together the fragments that survived 3,000 years of deliberate destruction and accidental loss. We have brought her back from the oblivion to which she was condemned. And every time someone visits a museum and stands before that famous bust, every time a young girl learns that a queen once ruled Egypt with absolute authority, every time a scholar publishes new research revealing another piece of the puzzle, Nefertiti lives again. She is the beautiful one who came. And despite everything, she never truly left. The most powerful queen of ancient Egypt endures not despite the attempts to erase her, but in some sense because of them, because erasure reveals what those in power fear most. And what they feared most was a woman who refused to be forgotten, a woman who wielded power too great to be completely erased, a woman who left marks too deep to be entirely removed. They tried to destroy her, and by trying so desperately, they testified to her importance. They confirmed her power. They proved that she mattered so profoundly that she had to be obliterated. But she could not be destroyed. And now, thousands of years later, we remember. We remember Nefertiti not as a footnote or a beautiful face, but as what she truly was, a political revolutionary who stood at the center of the most radical transformation in ancient Egyptian history. A religious innovator who helped replace 3,000 years of tradition with something utterly new. A ruler who may have commanded the most powerful empire on earth. Her story is not just ancient history. It is a reminder that women have always sought power, wielded authority, and changed the world. That their contributions are worth recovering and remembering, that their stories matter. Because when we forget the women who shaped history, we impoverish our understanding of what humans are capable of. We accept a false narrative that portrays power as inherently masculine, that suggests authority belongs naturally to men, that implies women throughout history were passive observers rather than active participants in shaping civilization. Nefertiti proves that narrative is a lie. She ruled, she commanded, she shaped one of the most radical transformations in ancient history. She wielded power that terrified men so thoroughly they tried to erase her from existence. And she survived anyway. 3,000 years later, her face still gazes out at us from museums and textbooks and magazine covers. That single intact eye still sees, still judges, still demands that we remember. And we do remember. We remember that a woman once stood equal to a pharaoh. We remember that she may have ruled Egypt in her own right. We remember that power is not the exclusive province of men, has never been and never will be. Nefertiti's return is not just the recovery of one woman's story. It is the recovery of possibility itself. The possibility that women can lead, can command, can shape the destiny of nations. The possibility that history is richer and more complex than simplified narratives allow. The possibility that what has been forgotten can be remembered, what has been erased can be recovered, what has been denied can be acknowledged. The past is not dead, it speaks to us if we are willing to listen. And the voices that were silenced, the stories that were suppressed, the people who were erased, they can be heard again if we care enough to recover them. History is not just what happened, it is what we choose to remember, what we work to recover, what we refuse to let die. Nefertiti has returned, and she is not alone. All around the world, in archives and archaeological sites, in forgotten documents and buried cities, there are stories waiting to be recovered. Stories of women who ruled and fought and built and created. Stories that were deliberately suppressed because they threatened the comfortable narratives of those in power. Stories that prove human capability and human courage transcend the categories we try to impose. If Nefertiti's story has moved you, if it has made you think differently about power and memory and the people history tried to erase, then I invite you to join us here at Mementos Historians as we continue this work. There are countless more stories like this one: forgotten rulers who changed everything, lost civilizations that challenge what we thought we knew, individuals whose vision pivoted the fate of nations. Subscribe and become part of this journey of recovery and remembrance. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Tell us what you think happened to Nefertiti. Share theories you have encountered or ideas you have developed. These ancient mysteries are puzzles we solve together, combining rigorous scholarship with insatiable curiosity, evidence with imagination, precision with wonder. The woman they tried to erase now stares back at us across millennia with a gaze that refuses to be ignored. She demands that we remember not just her, but all the forgotten voices, all the erased contributions, all the suppressed possibilities. Thank you for joining me on this journey through ancient Egypt, through palace intrigues and religious revolutions, through the rise and fall and ultimate resurrection of one of history's most extraordinary women. Until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep remembering the stories they tried to erase.